All right. Well, thanks, Ethan. Really happy, proud to be here with you all. Thanks, everyone, for joining us tonight. I hope you can see my slides here now. My name is Tom Lang. I am part of the Aurora Reimagined Coalition, one of the core members, and also represent the Greenwood-Finney Greenways community group. And I'm joined tonight by Lee Brush, who represents Lichtenhaller Greenways community group, as well as Ryan DeRamo of the Aurora Lichten Urban Village community group. So a lot of grassroots work here. You'll hear from each of us at some point, but I'm going to kick us off giving an overview of the coalition, what we're doing, what we hope to do, and what we have kind of observed from our perspective so far when it comes to Aurora. And I recognize a lot of the names here. So if you have heard some of this overview before, bear with us. We're going to get to some really interesting new stuff that's specific to the Holler Lake neighborhood. To start though, I'll just say the Aurora Reimagined Coalition, grassroots led, all volunteer. We have no connection to the city or any department. We'll talk a lot about SDOT and WashDOT, the Departments of Transportation, both at the city and the state level, but we have no connection with them. We're really just working off of what they are doing, kind of as a response, but also hoping to influence what they do as an outside perspective. To start, I know all of you are familiar with Aurora. We live right next to it. I myself am in Licton Springs area on the Greenwood side of Aurora, but it goes without saying that Aurora has a lot of problems. We like to say it has 99 problems. That's our catchphrase. But to be honest, the problems that listed on this slide here, dangerous, loud, polluted, unsafe, undesirable, underutilized, this is just the tip of the iceberg. We're going to talk about a couple of these in particular, but one of the problems that we observed as a group, and naturally as many of us being transit-oriented, focused on pedestrian and bike safety, the problems that we initially recognized and brought to the surface first were the fact that Aurora has no space for people who are not in cars. You can see the pictures on this slide of people in the bus lane along Aurora, on scooters, on bikes, both in the middle of the day as well as early morning, late evening. Right now, this time of year, it's dark a lot of the day and it's very dangerous on Aurora, even if you're in a car, but imagine being on a bike. And then on top of that, you'll see the far right picture. There's kids walking in the shoulder lane, or not even the shoulder lane, walking where there should be sidewalks. There's literally no place for some people along Aurora. And we'll talk about in a minute the number of schools that abut Aurora, that are near Aurora, and the number of students that cross Aurora every day. So it's startling when you really stop and think about what Aurora is like. Talking about who we are, the coalition is a collection of individuals, community members, as well as community groups and nonprofits. We are proud to have the Holler Lake Community Club as a member of the coalition, but you'll see here on the screen a few others. We're always looking for more people to join the coalition, but really we are focused on creating a better Aurora for the entire community, for people up and down the corridor, from the tunnel down in South Lake Union from Bertha all the way to the border with Shoreline 145th Street. That's the entire extent of Aurora Avenue North. And that's what we're focused on improving all the way up and down. One question that you might be asking is why now? Aurora's been like this for who knows how long, maybe 100 years, my entire lifetime. I grew up here and I've always known Aurora to be a little seedy. But the question, why should we talk about it now? Why should we focus on it now? To be honest, it's dangerous and it's getting more dangerous. On this slide, I put down a statistic. In the last 10 years, 24 people have been killed walking along or crossing Aurora. We made this slide back at the beginning of the year when we first formed the coalition, and unfortunately that number has gone up in not even a year. 27 people have now been killed in the last 10 years. It's becoming more dangerous, and we expect in the next month and 2 months before the end of the year, we'll hit a new record for the number of people killed in the city of Seattle walking and biking along our roads. That's unacceptable. So that's our main reason to focus on this and try to solve it now. The other reason that it's very timely to talk about Aurora today, this year, this month, is that there is a pending or impending study being conducted by Seattle Department of Transportation. They have put forward $500,000, and that is matched by $1.5 million from the Washington State Department of Transportation to create a $2 million transportation safety study. And this is really looking at alternative forms of transportation, so non-car uses, but they're going to look at the entire extent of the Aurora corridor and think about how we can make it safer, both in the near term and long term for everyone. And we are really focused right now on influencing that study, and hopefully we'll get the departments of transportation to think about Aurora not just in the next 2 years, short-term fixes, but how can we reimagine the corridor long-term in the next 20, 30, 40 years? And that's the name of the coalition. We want to reimagine Aurora. If there's I should say at the very beginning, we will definitely take any and all questions throughout. There's a lot of things we'll be talking about. So if you have any questions, feel free to put into the chat. And also feel free to raise your hand, as Ethan said. You'll find that button down at the bottom, the reactions button. There's a raise hand option. So happy to answer any questions if there are any about the coalition at this point. But Lee, can I turn it over to you for the next slide? I think these are your Lee Brush is a font of wisdom and knowledge of the history around Aurora, both the good and the bad. And he's put together a lot of really interesting slides here about, here you'll see density, but also the crashes that have occurred over the last 10, 20 years along Aurora. So Lee is going to move this presentation forward and talk more about some of the details specific to the Bitter Lake and Hollow Lake Urban Village area.
Okay, I'm not sure how wise I am, but I've been around for quite a while, working on safe streets in North Seattle. And I'm going to try to hurry through the presentation so there's a lot of time where we can get together and talk and ask questions of each other at the end. But I am slow in thinking and slow in speaking, so I'm not sure how fast to be racing. This slide, obviously, we're all familiar with what it's like in this area. The red lines are where there is no sidewalk on either side. The blue lines are where there's sidewalk on only one side. And you can see it's pretty sporadic. One of the awkward things is the sidewalks, sometimes they're on one side, and then the next block it's on the other side, just how it happens to be how it was created. This area is one of the more dense areas along Aurora. A tremendous number of apartments up along Linden. Next slide. The area where all the Electner or the Bitter Lake or Urban Village is actually at a really key location because it's right along Aurora, but it's also along the 130th. And 130th is a major east-west arterial. It's one of the only arterials in North Seattle where you can go from the east side to the west side of I-5. It's unfortunately it's fairly constricted in space, but there are a lot of things that try to jam into that corridor. It's a major arterial for cars. It's a major arterial for public transit, especially once the 130th Street station opens. It's going to be very much more important. It's one of the few ways the bike could get across from north to from east to west across I-5. So there's a lot of tendency to want to ride along that, but a lot of danger in doing so. And then freight. It's one of the big freight corridors in Seattle's planning for streets. So all those conflicting needs are growing over time, especially within the 130th Street station. So it creates a problem along there. And then Aurora, we all know what a lot of the problems on Aurora are. So the next slide. Okay. This is a detail of the heart of the urban village. You can see that the yellow lines, the yellow dots, are where there are existing sidewalks, and the red dots are where there are no sidewalks. And unfortunately, the red dots are at very key critical locations. At 130th on the south side, that's an area where there's a real problem. But the biggest problem is up between 130th and 135th, where there are very few sidewalks on the west side, as we all know. I don't know how many of you have, you all are familiar, I'm sure, with driving along Aurora and things, seeing Aurora from that angle. I know many of you have actually walked along a lot of these areas, but I would greatly encourage you to do so, carefully. But it really is a different perspective. We had a walk that we did with some people, including one of the office people from Councilmember Juarez's office, and he commented that he had never experienced it from other than a car, and he was quite shocked. This walk, we'll look at the statistics later, but between 130th and 135th, that is the most dangerous block of Aurora by far. There are other areas that are also dangerous, but that one is worse. One of the big problems in that area is that the Amazon, as you know, has put in their fresh Amazon Fresh there in the middle of that block. They've also are going to have a distribution center for the periodic drivers, and you can see the signs up in the parking lot for their stalls with a place where they can run in and out to get their things. That's going to mean a lot more traffic turning on and off of Aurora. And a very strange anomaly in the Seattle codes. When Amazon did their work in that existing building, they did enough work that under the building code, the entire building had to be brought up to current code because it was considered a major alteration. But that does not apply to a zoning code. And so from the zoning code, if this had been a new building, they would have been required to put in sidewalks all along Aurora in that block and do a traffic study and address any impacts that their work might cause. But because there are an anomaly in the code, they were not required to do any of that. Okay, next slide. One of the worst places in that area that we were just talking about is near the corner of 130th and Aurora, which you can see here. Strangely enough, a lot of people walk down the hill from the the retirement home. There's 221 unit senior citizen home at the corner of Linden and Aurora. Right now, a lot of them come roll down or walk down, limp down to this corner. If they're going across the street, they have to maneuver across the traffic. But if they're going to go north on Aurora, this is what they face. What's on the picture? A rough gravel area, a curb, and then they have to get in the shoulder of the road and walk up and down the road. We looked at a whole lot of things. One of the things that we at around this intersection, all sorts of at all four quadrants, there were a lot of little things that can get done over time that aren't going to cost much money. And we talked to Juarez's office about conceivably getting some money in this year's budget, in this next year's budget. But in fact, that a whole lot of other things took precedence over that. But the one place that I personally think that it wouldn't take a whole lot of money, maybe $100,000 or so, I don't know, is to improve what that photo shows. In the next slide. Right, just north of where we were just looking at the old site on the east side of Aurora, Costco has recently proposed putting in a store. That also is in an existing building. So again, they're not going to, or it is very likely that SDCI will not require them to do a traffic study to study the impacts of it, and to do any improvements on the streets surrounding it. That's one of the things I'd like to see the code eventually change, but it's going to be hard, and it's going to be sometime down the pike. The particular things that I've noticed that are problematic at this site is at cars coming from the north going southbound on Aurora are going to have to try to turn into that parking lot. So there's a potential for more traffic problems at that location. At option B, at location B, there's obviously a lot of the missing sidewalks. And there's currently a whole lot of turning traffic at that intersection. When Costco is running full bore, a lot of the cars coming from the north will tend to have to wait for that intersection and turn over onto 135th and then go into C, into that place that's marked C. There are all sorts of concerns about that. I think we're all excited to have that place used and used effectively, and I'm certainly happy to have a Costco around. But it's going to make it much more urgent that someone, be it Costco or be the city or the state, do some major improvements right in there in that area. Next slide. One of the issues about that area is partly how traffic will get to and from the Provost Costco. It's probably not going to have as many, I'm guessing, my own personal guess, is that the people from the north will tend to probably still shop at their existing Costco up in Shoreline. But from Seattle to the south, is probably where the lion's share of their traffic will be. So they'll get off the freeway at 130th, drive over on 130th, and then the easiest way to get to Costco from there would be to go up Stone Avenue. And again, there are sidewalks on one side, no sidewalks on the other side of that. And there are all sorts of other implications with traffic. There'll be more turning traffic coming from the west on 130th, then turning north on Aurora towards the Costco. So there are potential impacts that the city is going to have to address. Next slide. Okay, as with the 130th Street station, the city, SDOT, in concert with SDs, or the Office of Planning and Community Development, OPCD, did a study which they completed in December of this last year. And actually, I would recommend looking at that study. If I can find its location. There we go. I'll put that on the website, on the chat. SDOT, it's a long study, but it's worthwhile reading for how to get people to and from 130th Street Station. It identified a whole lot of alternatives, which you can see on this map. But it did not choose between any of the alternatives. And it just left it there. I had always presumed that that it was the first part of a multi-part study. However, I was at a meeting last night, which at that meeting I found out from SDOT that apparently that is the study. It lists the various alternatives. It did not decide between the alternatives. More worrisome than that is there is no funding aside for more studies, nor for any implementation of any of the work. That will have to wait, according to the person I was talking with last night, to the next levy, which could be years down the road. Shoreline on 145th is actually proceeding with their portion and are getting ready to actually, they're in design for some final construction, but it's only along 145th. I think it's one of the things that we're going to have to start agitating for within the city to get some monies established for various improvements east-west. Okay, next slide. It'll 130th does become more important when the station opens, but also when the Costco opens, it'll have much more traffic. One of the fortunate things about what things are like right now is all those yellow parcels are publicly owned from in various, some of them by Seattle Parks, others by Seattle Schools, and a lot of them, most of them, by various divisions within Seattle. So there's always a possibility of Seattle having more say in what happens with those properties, or at least along the frontage of the street of those properties. And it has a little bit more implications about what could get done. In particular, at the corner of Aurora and 130th, that property, which is currently leased to a car distributor, is one of the ones that has very awkward sidewalks. And so Seattle has more leverage in that case because they are the owners of the land. A lot of it depends upon what the city is willing to do, willing to spend attention on, and willing to spend funds on. Next slide. Okay. One of the things that is actually funded, or was funded, is SDOT has for the last several years been working on a greenway on just going past Howler Lake and serving the Ingram High School, going across 125th and 130th north-south. Most of that is done. There are a couple of things that are still hanging. They were going to do a pedestrian lighting system at that portion that's listed as a pedestrian lighting study. That's a concreted walkway, multi-use path in behind the Seattle Public Utilities Works Yard. It's actually a very pleasant place, almost park-like. But at night, of course, it's very, very dark. So they were looking at doing a pedestrian lighting study. As of late 2019, they were looking at that. Once the COVID stuff started, it was one of the things that was paused during the COVID cutbacks. The other more important thing that's in the similar situation is that we're going to put in a pedestrian signal at 130th, which would be very helpful for the people at Ingram and further south, and to use that. The pause has not been removed yet. Hopefully it will. Again, it's one of the things that's always helps to have people advocate to actually get things to happen. They had the money all reserved in the budget until it got cut because of COVID. Okay, next slide. All these prior slides show various problems, and a lot of them have to do with safety. And you can see on this slide how one of the most dangerous areas on Aurora are within the Bitter Lake urban village, and with the most collisions. Next slide. Specifically, when one looks at this urban village itself, at each, the green lines are where are intersections, and the white lines are the blocks between the intersections. And you can see that the block between 130th and 135th is again abnormally dangerous compared to other intersections. And that's compared to other intersections within the most dangerous area of Aurora. So it's a reason to be concerned it's a reason to be able to try to get the city to be able to more quickly address some of the things. It's too bad that SDCI did not require that when Amazon put in their the thing that's not even open yet. I'm going to be recording traffic reports on that over to see how much worse things get once that facility opens. Next slide. And although safety is a big issue, and of course, one of the things that the SDOT study of next year will address more than anything, probably from an engineering perspective, is safety. But it's a much more broad situation. It's about the way we want to live, the way we want our neighborhoods to be, and it's something that really should involve the planning department, Department of Neighborhoods, a whole lot of the city departments. Okay, and next slide. Okay, now the big thing is, what can we do? That is, Aurora Licton or the Aurora Reimagined Coalition do, and what can you do? Because I think it always takes a whole lot of people getting together to do things. It takes enthusiasm and hard work and advocacy with our electeds. I think most of the people that I've talked with at SDOT realize the problems here, but they don't have the budget to accommodate them. And so it really is important to advocate with the electeds. There's power in numbers. The more people who speak out, the more people who are loud, the more likely that the wheel will get greased. So, I think it's important if we can all get involved and we can all try to get others involved in improving Aurora and convincing our electeds to spend more money on doing what they need to do. This is one of the things on the slide that I had not yet changed, because I thought they were actively doing the next step of their study. But from what I understood last night, they're not. So it's not important to get involved in the study right now. It's important to get the study completed and get some funding for the implementation of some of the results, as whatever that study comes up with. In similar ways, and that's on 130th Street. On similar way, SDOT will be studying Aurora. And so that one is something to keep your eye on, to get involved with, to make your feelings and your understanding of this situation more apparent. And one of the things that we would like to do, we from Aurora Reimagined Coalition, is to talk with you at this meeting to see what your concerns are. We know where our concerns are. To put all our heads together and see how best we can help each other. And next slide. Our next meeting of Aurora Reimagined Coalition is this next Monday. So it's always on the second Monday of the month, and it's on Zoom, just like this. So if you go to our website, there's a join button at the top right. where you can get, you can click on that and get listed so that you're on the mailing list for that. One of the other organizations that's working with us is various Greenways groups in the area, including Lichtenholler Greenways. And I put on the on chat right now the websites for both those. Okay, that's hopefully has been of interest to you, and we're open to questions and comments.
Brent has one question in the chat, but before we dive into that really, I think, complex conversation, I want to make sure everyone else has a chance to share their questions and before they forget. So feel free in the chat or unmute, raise your hand and ask those questions. Celia's asking, what is Northwest Greenways? That's a good question. It is kind of a catch-all for the Greenways groups that are in North Central Seattle. There's a lot of neighborhoods that don't have a full representation, so we kind of put them all together as Northwest Greenways, but there's individual neighborhoods represented. Bitter Lake is one example. There's no Bitter Lake Greenways group. So instead, they're kind of folded into that Northwest Greenways idea and have representation from a couple people through that. I'll also highlight that, as Lee said, there will be a lot of opportunities coming up with the SDOT transportation study next year. A lot of opportunities to share your thoughts about how Aurora can be improved, what SDOT can do in the short term and long term. And that will be community outreach done by the city, not at all involved with the Aurora Reimagined Coalition. Nevertheless, we will, of course, be sharing all of those important outreach events, dates and times, and links to Zoom meetings and all that stuff. So if you just want to stay on top of everything Aurora related for this coming year, I would say join our mailing list. Whether you agree with us or not, we don't care. We just want to make sure everyone has the times and the links they need to join those meetings and have their voices heard.
I guess my question would be to all the attendees, what do you perceive as the biggest need in the area, especially along Aurora, but also other places as well? That helps direct us. It also helps people to understand what various people think about the biggest important needs are. I notice Ethan's hands up.
Oh, I was passing on sort of a question that's a little curious to me of when we posted in Nextdoor, some of the discussion was, are we talking about prostitution there? Which is not something you've covered, but I can see how improving the safety for pedestrians and bicyclists and general qualities of that could affect that both ways. And I don't know if you have thought about that. It is quite a hub right in that same stretch that you're talking about. Has been suddenly last 2 years, a hub of prostitution.
Yeah, well, especially in the last 2 years, but let's all be honest, it's been there, I think, for 20 plus years, as long as I remember. Yeah. We get that question a lot, kind of when people ask us, are you talking about safety in terms of transit and traffic? Are you talking about safety in other regards? And my answer, and feel free, Lee, Ryan, I see also Robin's on the call. Feel free to chime in if you have a different thought. But my perspective is it's all related, and there's virtuous cycles and vicious cycles, negative cycles. So if you improve an area, build sidewalks that aren't there, plant the trees that aren't there, clean up the trash, have more policing if it's not there already. If you do all these positive things, it will be compounded by increased investment from the business community, from neighborhood groups, from just neighbors coming out and enjoying the space. Similarly, or opposite, if you neglect an area, you allow, prostitution, open drug use, and crime and litter to be everywhere along the streets, then you'll eventually get businesses moving out, shuttered doors. And I think, and for lack of a better word, it's blight. And what we've had along Aurora for a generation now is blight. And it's getting a little worse in some places for sure. But we believe that one of the first things we can do, especially because of this SDOT traffic study, is to focus on the safety issues that people on foot face. Because whether you drive a car, take the bus every day, or ride a bike, at some point you're going to get onto your feet and move by your feet to the store, to your car, to your front door. Everyone is a pedestrian at some point. And I mean, no disrespect to people who are wheelchair bound, but what I mean is everyone is going to be using sidewalks at some point. So if we can fix that problem first, I think we can then build on it. So that's my perspective. I think the question around what kind of safety are we talking about? All of it. We want to talk about everything. Aurora has 99 problems. Let's talk about all of them. But right now we're really focused on transportation only because the safety study is coming up next year and we have a really good opportunity to influence that as community activists.
Let me say one more thing. As a meeting organizer, I've just set up so everybody can unmute yourselves. We got a small enough group here. I think that's probably okay. You don't have to raise your hand if you want to jump in with a question. So, go ahead, Lee.
One of the things that I try to look ahead. I try to look 5 years, 10 years ahead at all times. I used to live in actually Vancouver, BC, a long time ago, in the 70s, when in my area, there was a lot of prostitution and a lot of it was not dissimilar from the areas around Aurora. It had a lot of good bones to the area, but it had never been developed as well. And over time, especially since all the buildings along the south shore of False Creek and other places, as those were built, it actually really, without a whole lot of impetus by police or anyone else, it changed the nature of the neighborhood. For the better in some people's view, and neutral for others. It's always a question. How much gentrification is good, how much gentrification is bad. But it did over time slowly change the nature of the prostitution, and it made the place a little bit more attractive to some people. Having some German background, I've always wondered why the United States doesn't have more sort of legalized prostitution areas, but that is another whole concern. But looking at ahead, looking at like even 5 years down the road, 4 years down the road, you've recently had a Sprouts come in, and a number of stores on the east side of Aurora between 135th and 130th. And then on the west side, the shopping center has really struggled for a long time, but now has an Amazon Fresh coming in. It has all the Amazon delivery drivers that'll be coming in. It's going to create a lot more, not only traffic in a bad sense, but traffic in a good sense, and that it'll feel a more lively place, less like a back alley. And then when Costco goes in, It's even going to improve things a lot more. There will be a lot more people on the coming in, and I think what you'll find is that a lot of things that happen in back alleys will tend to move away from those areas that are more that are more populated.
Thank you very much. That's a lot more than I thought of for that.
So the one big question here in the chat from Brent is, I'll read the question out loud. Amazon is swimming in money. Can you share some ideas about how public pressure might move Amazon to invest in some safe pedestrian infrastructure, since SDCI is not requiring them to do anything about the increased hazards they bring? And I know this is a complex question, obviously. Kind of how can the general public influence individual corporations? And of course, we can put pressure on SDCI and our elected officials, but at this point, it looks like Amazon is almost done building their store. So the question might be, well, let's move let's move the pressure to the corporation and off of the government at this point. Though, of course, long-term, we need to fix this problem so it doesn't happen again. So the question, I open it up to everyone. I don't know the best way to put pressure on a corporation, especially one the size of Amazon with the influence it has in the city. But yeah, there's a lot of different tactics we could take as community activists to do such a thing.
It'll be interesting to see over time, over the next little bit, once they've opened their delivery services, how that affects traffic and how it affects collisions there along Aurora. And actually, it'll also affect collisions along Linden, where people can, some of the drivers will be able to drive along a Linden and then dodge down a couple of the driveways. And it'll be very interesting to see what occurs. And one of the things I really am intending to do is keep a much more watchful eye on the SDOT collision database and see what information I can drive out of that over the next year. And as it relates to that specific site. And maybe some of that could be used in some way, advocating for Amazon to do some of the community work that they really should be doing. I mean, like if you own a small store, most small stores go out of their way to help the community that they're right in because they're part of that community. And we could ask the same thing of Amazon. But to get the question I asked a while ago, what do you guys perceive as some of the biggest problems that you would like to see addressed by ourselves or by others along Aurora or in this whole area? And let's get a conversation started about that.
Yeah, it seems like this group is a little shy, camera shy at least. In the chat, though, a couple of folks have said sidewalks and curbs. And I'll just, for what it's worth, I'll say that is a sentiment we've heard overwhelmingly from hundreds of people. We did a community survey, set up a community survey back in April of this year, have over 500 responses, and a lot of people, I forget the exact number, I think it's around 30% of people say we need better pedestrian infrastructure, whether that's sidewalks, curbs, trees, crosswalks, or all of the above. We just need a better way for people to move around on foot. And that's especially true in the Bitter Lake, Howler Lake neighborhood.
So Linwood, just north of this stretch, has beautiful section of Aurora, wide sidewalks, art, plants. Do you know how they got that done?
I have a little bit of knowledge of that. They, well, for one, Aurora was, they're a fairly new community. And Aurora is the main street of that community. And it was the whole community, the entire power structure behind the community, as well as the city, everyone wanted to see their main street be better. They back in about, I don't know specifically the year, the early 2000s, 2003 maybe a little bit before, there was an impetus that Seattle would, at the same time as Linwood Shoreline, would upgrade Aurora, just like Shoreline did. At that time, Aurora Merchants Association threatened to take the city to court. They did not want to see much change to Aurora. At the same time, a similar group of take Shoreline to court. Shoreline said, okay, do it, because we will fight you. Seattle said no. At about the same time, a very astute businessman over in Lake City got a whole bunch of people together to get to advocate for and pass an improvement district. And they lobbied the city and the state. The city and the state had money reserved for Aurora. And they lobbied to get a lot of that money removed when Seattle backed out of doing anything. That money was transferred to Lake City. The 5th and Lake City Way, it's been improved quite a bit. That came from that initiative. That came from the Aurora money. And actually, because of that one period of time, both the state and the city have been cooperating to do more changes along Lake City Way, which I don't begrudge that. That's as important as of a street. In fact, it has more traffic than does Aurora, strangely enough. It is unfortunate for the last 20 years because of some of the decisions made back 20 years ago that has languished. And the city is really, in my own guess, not knowledge, has been a little bit gun shy about spending a lot of money up here because of that. They did, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, did do a study on Aurora, and it did which was basically a traffic safety study, saying what can we do with no money that would help things. And so out of that came a number of things. They made some little minor improvements here and there. They did a sign of a billboard thing along Aurora, hoping that would change some people's actions. But those sort of things, they do help. And the state safety impact study at that time did help. They actually showed that they got things to drop down a little bit in terms of collisions. But once you go, those things happen, and then 2 years later, it's all forgotten, and the collisions keep increasing and resume their increase. One of the things that worries me is that this study that SDOT is doing, there's no guarantee at all of any funding to do things that the study might show need doing. The way they worded, the way the state worded the study, if they do have the ability to spend some money outside of the actual study to actually do some things. But $2 billion does not go very far. I was involved in getting the pedestrian signal at 92nd and Aurora. And we amassed 3 different grants to get that, the neighborhood down there, both from the both for that, and at the same time the artwork over the bridge at Oaktree Village. It was about $1 million just for that. And so you can see that $2 million is not going to go very far.
To add to that, kind of stepping back and looking at the big picture and the long-term time frame of fixing Aurora, quote unquote, I think Lee's totally right. There's $2 million. Most of that's going to be spent just on the outreach and the study and the thought, I guess, from SDOT side. A little bit of money for small improvements, but anything major won't happen, and they definitely won't be able to do anything kind of corridor wide that would fundamentally change the highway. What we are hoping, what we really are working towards, is mobilizing enough community pressure, amplifying community voices to such a degree that it is overwhelmingly obvious to SDOT and to all the elected officials in the city that the community wants to see significant change and not the status quo. We don't want spot improvements. We don't want short-term fixes. We want to change the highway so that it's better for people long-term. And that is going to be a huge effort, but there's already a lot of promising signs that different departments in the city are working together on different aspects of community in Aurora, whether that's transportation or housing or community centers or parks. In addition to that, the WSDOT element, since it is a state highway, WSDOT is actually working together with SDOT in a number of ways, both on Aurora as well as in other places around the city. So there's a lot of good signs that the collaboration that's needed on the bureaucrat side is there. The politicians just need to hear from us. So really our role for the next year or two is to mobilize the community's voices, to amplify them and let people know this needs to change. We don't want another short-term fix and then come back in 20 years and repave it and talk again about how we can maybe improve it. We need a radical improvement now. And I think this is the time and the place, and we are the people to make it happen.
One more thing on the long-term plan. Right now, between the tunnel and the border, there's 1,000 homes either under construction or approved on Aurora. And those are the blocks that are immediately facing Aurora. So between that, there's obviously housing growth. It's centered on about 4 urban villages in North Seattle. So those are areas that are going to continue to grow. The population is going to continue to grow. These houses are already in the pipeline, so to speak, and many more will continue. The other thing too is it gets attention from other jurisdictions. Like the E-line has the highest ridership in the whole King County metro system, which ranks #1 in the whole state. The corridor itself has been targeted by Seattle Subway as a light rail upgrade for if there were to be a 4th Sound Transit expansion. That 4th Sound Transit expansion would be essentially a city of Seattle only expansion. And they have some funding opportunities to utilize like the old monorail funding resources that or methods of resources that they're hoping to get passed through the state legislature. So stuff like that is definitely on the realistic horizon. And I think that all of the attention that's given to Aurora for that regard, plus the immediate stuff that like the housing growth. There's 12 schools near Aurora. So you have kids of all ages crossing from their catch zones, Aurora, and so the city and state know that something needs to be done, or they wouldn't have put this study together. So,
I'm on about the schools. I'm on the School Traffic Safety Committee, Seattle's, and part of our role is to help get crossing guards. The crossing guards on Aurora at 90th, 92nd is the one that's almost impossible to keep filled. People try to be crossing guards there, and then they throw up their hands and say, it's too dangerous. I need to go somewhere else. And so they get, and there's a plethora of places that need crossing guards so that they get moved off. But it's been a real problem. At 80th, there's a crossing guard there. It's not been quite as bad, but it's also a difficult one to keep filled.
I hate to keep talking at everyone. I wish this was more of a conversation. We'd love to hear what your thoughts are, your priorities, how you see improving Aurora in the short term, long term, and all of that.
And how do you use Aurora?
I saw a comment in the chat here about east-west transit all the way from Greenwood to Lake City along North 130th would be really helpful. Definitely east-west transit anywhere in the city is hard to come by, effective east-west transit. Alleviate traffic congestion in advance of the 130th Street light rail station and the new Costco. My question there is, when you say alleviate traffic congestion, what does that mean? This is one of those really specific nuances that I think we can get bogged down in, but I think it's also important to kind of understand how congestion happens and how we can theoretically fix it.
Well, Tom, if that's a question back to me, there will be more traffic with the Costco and with this Amazon Fresh. And before that light rail station is built, it would be very helpful to already have people using transit in the habit of using east-west transit to get where they're going. The light rail will only increase that, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I was kind of hoping other people would also share their views on
yeah, you know my view on that.
Yeah, but that's I think you're right, and I think it bears repeating, even if the audience here kind of knows this and understands it intuitively. It's helpful when you're engaged in conversations with your neighbors, with family, folks who maybe don't stop and think too much about traffic, which I know sounds ridiculous to most people. Why would you stop and think about traffic? But congestion really is something that is we're all responsible for it. And when we talk about let's put in dedicated bus lanes, what that isn't saying is here's something for the transit riders. What that's saying is here's a way to alleviate congestion. The more people we take out of private vehicles and put into buses, the more space we'll have on the road. The more people who are given the opportunity to ride a bike to work or to the grocery store rather than drive their car, the more space on the road. So like you said, Brent, we're definitely going to see increased congestion all along Aurora and 130th Street for a number of reasons. And as Ryan mentioned, 1,000 new houses or homes being built right now, and we're expecting, double the population in the next 50 years. It's going to get really crowded on our roads. And I don't think we can in any way make it easier for people to drive their cars. What we can do is make it easier for people to not drive their cars, which will then leave more room open to everyone else who is driving a car. And I think that nuance is often lost when we talk about congestion, traffic, biking, busing, and all of these other things, building a new train line. Why would we build a train line? I don't ever ride the train. It's not about you. It's actually about everyone and how we can, get the right people to the right mode of transportation so that we alleviate the stresses on our road system.
As to using Aurora, I live just close to 125th, a couple blocks off. Often went to the businesses despite the danger. Went up to that same crossing you showed at 130th and off, and walking through that terrible section of the road to get to the nice karaoke place for lunch. I go to those businesses. I'm terrified each time, especially when I had littler kids, bringing them there, but I'd do it a lot more if I could walk safely on Aurora. Well, I think maybe we've exhausted the questions. Should we call this a night? I want to thank you guys very much again for coming and talking to us. I really appreciate that. And remind everybody, this is going to be up on YouTube recording. If somebody you think needs to see this, I can point to that. I know one person I'm going to point to right away as soon as we're done. And thank you again very much. I'm going to use my reaction button for some applause here.
And thank you for having us talk with you guys.
Yeah, thank you.
We're all about serving the neighborhood.
Thanks, you guys.
Okay.
Good job.
So I'm going to end the meeting now. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.